what I've learned about the way we are in our brains is when you're in a meeting and you're hearing information, your goal is to stay open and curious and be able to be collaborative and be able to push the topic forward and get to where they want to go. What ends up happening, though, is if we start to question whether or not we should say something, if we start to watch others' behaviors and compare ourselves to them and maybe start having some emotional reactions or responses to what's going on around us, our brain is going to deal with the threat response of, uh-oh, versus I can stay open and curious because I'm not in a threat space.
Welcome to the Made Leader Podcast, where exceptional leadership isn't about who you are, but who you choose to become. Join your host, Jen Arnold, for expert interviews, real-world stories, and practical advice that transforms managers into exceptional leaders. If you're a middle manager ready to unlock your potential, this is your podcast. Let's get started.
Hey there, and welcome to the Made Leader Podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different. It is the first of a monthly series I'll call Coaching with Jen and Julie, where once a month I'm bringing on my friend and colleague, Julie Binter, for us to talk through a real-life leadership challenge. We're using questions we've been asked directly or have come across in our work with leaders. Julie and I met, it was about a year ago. We were going through a training certification on the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team and really enjoyed our work in the class together. And then we became friends afterwards, and she has become a trusted colleague that, we just nerd out on some of this training and facilitation and coaching stuff. But she's definitely a brilliant coach. And let me tell you a little bit more about Julie. Julie is the founder of Clear the Way Coaching and Consulting, a company focused on helping leaders, teams, and organizations get better at the people stuff. As a highly accomplished leadership coach, facilitator, speaker, and trusted advisor with over 15 years of experience, she partners with people who want to increase their effectiveness, navigate change, and achieve professional and personal success. Julie is deeply committed to ensuring everyone can incorporate new knowledge and skills into real life and thrive in today's working environment. The question we address today, the leadership challenge that we're talking about, it really centers around the question of, when should I speak up in meetings? Should I speak up in meetings at all? And how does that impact, your reputation and your political influence and your social capital within an organization? Your promotability, that's another piece. And we're going to talk through it. So I hope you enjoy this coaching session with Jen and Julie. Thank you so much for listening. Julie Binter, welcome to the Made Leader Podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thanks, Jen. I'm very honored and happy to be here with you today.
And this is our first coaching session where we're going to talk about a situation that we have come up against with a leader, and then we're just going to talk through it. But before we get started on that, I'd love you to fill in the blank on this sentence. And it is, if you really knew me, you would know that. Take it away.
Such a fun question. I would say, so one of my most important values that I've learned over time is integrity. And so I would say that over my last, 25 years, have really made an effort to do what I say I'm going to do, show up in the way I feel. So the people around me, if I'm showing that I'm energized and excited, that means I am. If I'm not having a good day, I will share that. If I agree and I'm on board, I will share that. And if I don't, I'll share that. So I've made it a mission of mine to be transparent so that people aren't second guessing what's really going on below the surface. They know that whatever's going on below the surface is the same as what's going on above the surface.
What you see is what you get with Julie.
You got it.
Which is one thing I love about you. And you know where you stand. There's no fakery, if that's even a word there.
It is a word. It is a word.
It is. Okay. Good to know. My husband Steve told me that I made up some word the other day. He's like, I don't think that's a word. I was like, all right, we'll change that.
but you never know. It might
Oh,
actually make the cut into the dictionary because they add words every year. So
Julie, I'm not that cool. Come on. It's not happening if
fair
I
enough.
say. All right. Well, the situation we have on tap today got a senior manager who is humble and doesn't really brag about herself much at all. She's been promoted many times, so she's well respected, well regarded in the organization. But we had the conversation about, hey, I am in meetings with the higher level leaders, and I'm not one to really speak my mind, or I need time to process my thoughts. And she has a colleague who will always speak up in meetings. So she is concerned that when she's not speaking up in meetings, then she's losing some of that, kind of leadership presence, right? They're overlooking her for, maybe overlooking is not the right word, but she's not speaking up enough to get attention of the higher ups. So,
Okay.
so what do you think? What advice would you give this senior manager?
I think I'd want to know a little bit more, and
Always.
always. And I think from a coaching perspective, there's two things that came up for me when you were sharing the scenario. The first is, what is it that's not happening that has led this person to believe that they're not doing enough? So they're observing somebody else, but what is that person getting that maybe she isn't, that is leading her to think that she has to change? The other thing that comes up for me is the labels that we use to describe ourselves. So I appreciate that there's self awareness of, I need time to process. I'm not going to be able to just think of it in the moment. I need time. At the same time, does the definition or the descriptor of I'm humble, is that a word or descriptor that could be holding this person back from being more talkative, or maybe what's the word I'm thinking of? The more vocal, more assertive in meetings. And is there a challenge for this person between, I see myself as humble, and am I is that still fitting in the definition for me to be assertive and to speak up? So that was the two things that came up for me as you were talking about it.
Yeah, and I don't know if she would describe herself as humble. I describe her as humble because I've just seen her. She's done wonderful things and will not be like, "Hey, look at me, look what I did." It's always like, "Oh, well, yeah, I had an idea," and it's just really plays it down.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think she'd disagree with that
Yeah.
description. But I think I do think what you just said is about reflecting on what's holding you back. Like,
Hmm.
is it because you call yourself humble? And then if you get, assertive, is that not in line with your definition? Correct me if I'm wrong on what you said. But I'm also wondering if there's times that she could have spoken up but didn't. If there's something
Hmm.
holding her back there, is it merely just processing time? Or is it like something else? Are there certain reasons, certain ways that she's holding herself back?
Yeah.
But I do think, I say, let me push on this. When you said, is it her colleagues doing something? And I think it's a male, what's he getting out of it? I think that's a fair assessment. But there's enough research to show that the more you talk, the more likely you're to get promoted. The more commanding you are of a room, the more likely you are to be assumed to be a powerful person. So, do you not think that there is some kind of reality that all leaders are facing? That if you're going to sit quieter in meetings, it could be perceived that your leadership presence isn't there.
I think you're right. I think there's the research out there, but I also question where the information. So in this culture that this person is working in, I've been in multiple cultures where being the loudest voice, the most assertive, the most vocal at a meeting is not necessarily going to get you anywhere. unless you're saying something of substance. And I remember one particular organization where the person who sat and listened and was quiet and then shared a reflection or shared a question or shared something after a lot of other people were talking, everybody just quieted down and turned to that person and were like, they don't say a lot. So when they do say something, it's got substance, it's got meaning. Whereas somebody who's saying something all the time, there's that element of, is what they're saying meaningful? Does it have substance? Or is it literally just talking, talking, talking because of, to what you said, I was told that that's how I get attention.
Yeah, yeah. If you're just talking to talk, people know those people, and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
roll your
yeah,
eyes.
yeah. But
Yeah.
it's interesting too, even knowing what the expectations of your leaders are. So these upper level leaders in the organization, what is it that they're wanting to see? Because if you're telling me she's been promoted, she's moved up in the organization, is this the element that's keeping her from going further? And how does she know? How could she find out?
Yeah, that was actually some feedback I gave was go talk to your leaders, right? Go ask them this question. Like here's my goal in the company. Here's my, what I want to accomplish. Here's one of the things. Is it holding me back? Or, what? So I did give her that recommendation to say, go find out. And also, I think a lot of relationships can be built outside of these meetings, right?
Absolutely.
The one-on-one relationships. And I even said, can you go share your idea? Go process it, because I'm a processor too, and I understand I'm not going to be in the moment with things sometimes. And so how can you distill what you processed and now bring that back to their attention in a different way that feels
Yeah.
more genuine to you, and going to them to go, hey, I had a thought about this meeting.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. If you know that you're not going to naturally feel as comfortable in the moment in a group of people, but you are developing those relationships one on one, and you feel like you've got trusted people that you can go to after the meeting. I mean, another thing that comes to mind as you're talking about this is it. So if I know in advance that I need to process stuff, what could I do before that meeting, before that opportunity to prepare? So I would have some thoughts. Maybe I could ask a question, because sometimes I think we get stuck in thinking we have to share, we have to say, we have to offer ideas. But sometimes the most powerful opportunity in the room is asking a question that gets more clarity or points out something missing or shows that we don't have enough information. And that person typically then becomes relied upon to then be like, oh, well, let's ask Jen. Because the last time we had this topic, Jen asked that really great question about blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that's coming up for me as well, is it doesn't have to be in the form of her colleague. It could be in the form of who she is. And so it looks natural and authentic. And, again, it could come individually with one person at a time. It could come in the form of a question, and it could come, I did some homework. I talked to the person hosting the meeting before the meeting to get a sense of what we were going to be doing.
Yeah,
So
I
I
like
felt
that.
more prepared. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, get it. It's like you're prepping for a meeting. I love that thought of going to go talk to the person ahead of time. And you've said this time, and then I heard you say it, like it kind of can still the room when you just ask a clarifying question, or you're like, how does that affect so and so, or how does this connect to the bigger picture?
Yeah.
You could ask that every time, and they're like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Exactly.
Could there be, connect to our company strategic goals?
Yep. Yep.
But could there be 3 to 4 questions that they have at the ready to say, okay, well, maybe
Absolutely.
that's just a clarifying question. And then you said earlier, which I want to make sure isn't missed, how do you gather everything that's been talked about if you're a good observer
Hmm.
and say, hey, what I'm hearing is this. Is this on the right track? Even if you just clarify it and go, let me summarize all these people talking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I even think about too, I mean, every single person is a little different, and all of her leaders are all going to be a little different and see things in a different way. So even, I know you had said, go talk to those leaders, even getting to know those leaders and not even one option is yes, go and talking and saying, hey, these are my goals. This is where I want to go. How can I get there? You and I both know that sometimes leaders struggle with giving feedback or giving constructive feedback to help somebody if they think it's going to hurt their feelings, or maybe they don't know how to word it. But even so, a second layer to this is talking to a couple of these leaders and asking them, what did you do to move up? What do you think is needed for somebody to move up in this company? Not her, but in general, what are the skills that the leaders are looking for to advance somebody, to see them in the upper echelon, if you will, but like in the very top level of the organization. And which of those qualities do I have now? And which are the ones that you think I should be working on some more? Because
I like that.
yeah, she may find that she might think it's that, but maybe it's something different. So that's kind of goes back to my initial question of like, what's telling her that this thing is potentially holding her back? How does she know it's this thing? Has she gotten feedback? Is she, you know, yeah, or is that kind of the story that she's developed based on what she's seeing?
I think, I think it's that point of in your leadership career where you're noticing things, right? So no one gave her feedback that, hey, you need to be talking more in meetings. It hasn't impacted her career. I think it's more of, okay, I'm noticing, I'm observing, I'm quiet. And we've all been in those meetings, right? Where you feel like, oh, well, that person has the answers. And, someone said, hey, good idea. And they're always talking and they're always getting kudos. And I'm just sitting here.
Right.
Should I be just sitting here? Do I need to, and I think it's a really great question. It's a reflection of her self-awareness to be like, okay, maybe I need to be stretching my leadership style a little from hanging back, taking time to process natural tendencies, right? To being, okay, there is a point where in some situations, in some companies, you do need to have said something. Like you said, it depends on the culture. Some cultures do want that. But I think regardless, I think any senior leader is going to want their managers, their directors to have a thought, an opinion, an idea, a clarifying question.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be one. It doesn't always have to be one type of thing. It can be a variety. And to your point, you said earlier, is having a couple of key questions, having a way to prepare, having different tools that she uses to set herself up for success. And, if she's in that meeting, even that awareness of when I'm in the meeting, this is what can help me speak up. And this is what might get in my way. And to be able to say, okay, if those things happen, how am I going to push through that anyway and still speak up because I have something I want to say. And I know that it's important that they hear it. So even that is being aware of what might stop her from speaking up, even if she does have something to say. Because I've been in that situation. Got lots of thoughts. I've got lots of questions, but I'm like, I don't know if this is right. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. And I think over my career, I've learned like, you know what, I'm going to say it anyway, because I've learned that many times there's other people in the room. I'll say it or ask it. And somebody will say, oh yeah, I was thinking that too. And then, okay, I'm not alone.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This reminds me, I'm sorry, it's a kid story. Let me just, I know people are like, oh, roll your eyes at your kids. But Ben, my very outgoing, curious child, got this recognition at school for being involved in the conversation and asking questions. And one of his teachers said, because everyone else is thinking the same thing. And when you start the conversation, other people join in.
I love that.
So it's just what you said. And so sorry for the kid story, but that's true. When you start asking questions and you speak up, you're bringing up stuff that other people aren't bringing up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And I think it's also this honoring your natural tendencies, right? I'm making this up. I'm a deep thinker. I'm introverted. I need time to process. And then also stretching yourself. And like you just said, moving past that when you sometimes just need to move past your natural tendencies. I'm all for your strengths, but there's times we all need to fill in some of the gaps, right?
Yep. Well, and you know that I am a lover and a practitioner and a teacher of emotional intelligence. And what I've learned about the way we are in our brains is when you're in a meeting and you're hearing information, your goal is to stay open and curious and be able to be collaborative and be able to push the topic forward and get to where they want to go. What ends up happening though is if we start to question whether or not we should say something, if we start to watch others' behaviors and compare ourselves to them and maybe start having some emotional reactions or responses to what's going on around us, our brain is going to deal with the threat response of, uh-oh, versus I can stay open and curious because I'm not in a threat space. I'm in an open, calm, right? So we have that amygdala hijack, or we've got that calm, intentional, thoughtful. So staying connected to our executive brain versus going into our emotional reactions and responses. I think even that awareness, and that's why I think, reflecting back when I said being aware of what it is that sets her into the questioning of if she's doing it right, if it's, she's starting to think about the emotional side, and she's not going to be able to stay present in the meeting and pay attention to what's being said and ask those powerful questions or stay curious longer. So I wanted to throw that out there because it is an important thing to know is you can't do both at the same time. So you have to
Right.
manage the emotional reaction.
Yeah, I'm just thinking too, what that brought up for me was that if you're also just sitting there waiting and hoping you have the best response and going, I need to ask this question, you're not in it either, right? You're not listening. Your questions will be like, they're
No.
gonna be like, what the hell did you just ask that question for? If you're not paying attention.
Well, and how many times have you been in meetings, Jen, where you're like, oh my gosh, I have this thing to say, and this is so important. And then somebody changes the subject, and you're like, oh no, I
What
can't
do I
bring
do
it back
now?
now. Yeah, exactly. Oh no, we're moving
Remember that
on. And
thing?
then, yeah,
Remember that
exactly.
thing we talked about 20 minutes ago? I have a
Yeah.
question.
I have something so important to say and I missed my opportunity. So let me just put it in there now. I was like, we have moved on. We're not talking about that anymore.
You get crickets. What?
Exactly.
Thanks for
Exactly.
that, Julie.
Yeah. I honestly think, Jen, too, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge. You talked about the research. We know in the workplace that women and men we have different scenarios, and the presence thing and how people see us for being assertive versus aggressive versus quiet. We know that there are dynamics at play in the real world that have socialized us and have caused uh, issues because a woman who does the same thing as a guy isn't always perceived or heard in the same way. And I think that's an element that's cultural within an organization, but it's also to, where have you worked before? What have your past experiences been? From a conditioning standpoint, I think the first, I would say 20 years, maybe 15 years of my career, I didn't feel comfortable speaking up because I didn't see a lot of other women speaking up and I didn't see a lot of other women in higher level leadership. As my career has progressed and I've gotten into the work I'm in now, I think I've definitely seen a shift. But I know from the coaching standpoint, a lot of upper level women leaders still struggle with these things. And so, it's important to kind of dig in a little bit to your own stuff, but not forget that there is that broader environment that is um, pushing us to question, as women, pushing us to question how we should show up and if we're doing it, quote unquote, right.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably talk about this in a future episode, but it's just the politics are a natural part of an organization. And it's one thing that I think this person's a lot more politically astute than I ever was in corporate. Like I was just so annoyed that I think this just shows my style because I'm like, nope, if you're good enough, you'll get ahead. And there's people out there influence and aren't doing the work, but they're getting ahead. Like it's the reality of it, right? There's influence in any organization, and you have to play the political game to some extent. And you can call it a political game or you can say influence, because if you have influence in an organization, that's going to help you get your job done, your team's job done. So it is just a reality. And if you're going to say that influence doesn't matter in an organization, then I hope you're happy where you are because
Right.
that's where you're going to stay because it does matter.
No, it really does. In grand scheme of things, it sounds like she's savvy enough to know too that whatever she learns about her journey and what works and what doesn't, she will pass on that wisdom and help develop those skills in her people as well.
Yeah, she's a fabulous leader, like
Which is great.
a wonderful leader. I just think it gets to a point where you're kind of mid-level and you're deciding, do I want to progress? Do I want to
Mm-hmm.
get promoted? And is this even something for me? And then let's just say I do. Then what are the rules of the game? Like how do I actually get promoted? And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if she's made that decision or not, what she wants it to be. But I think that's what happens when you're in a certain level of leadership is, do I stay the course and stay mid-level, or do I start moving up?
Yeah. Yeah. I forget who the quote is from, and I apologize. I don't remember, but there was this quote that I found a long time ago, and it says, like, I'm ad-libbing here, don't ask, what am I getting? Ask what I'm becoming by staying at this organization. And it's interesting. I met a lot of leaders and had this experience myself where I'm there and I'm saying, what am I getting? I'm getting promoted. I'm moving higher up. I'm making more money. I have a bigger team. I have more responsibility. But in the process, what am I becoming? I'm becoming more stressed. I'm becoming more agitated. I'm becoming less effective. Am I also becoming a better leader by taking advantage of what I'm getting at this organization? And there's been a couple places I've left because of that, because I realize, yes, I'm making the moves and I'm getting a lot on paper, but I'm also becoming maybe somebody I don't want to be, or I'm not staying true to my values as a person or as a leader. And I feel like there's definitely in her decision making process, I'm assuming those things are going to come up. She looks ahead.
I love that. That's a great quote. Well, if we had to summarize, let's summarize some of the take homes, and I'll start with one I heard was just reflecting on your own story.
Mm.
Like you said, like, what are you labeling yourself? Is that getting in your way? What is the story of the culture? Do you have to even speak up? What's your story about what this other person is speaking up? What are they getting? So
Yeah.
reflecting on some of what your thoughts are, right?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Well, one of the ones that, as you were sharing that, came up, which is, okay, so once you've gotten the information you need and you figure out that what you're doing right now is not going to be effective and you need to make a change, is how do you set yourself up for success so that you can grow, you can flex, you can adapt to respond in the way that is going to get you to where you want to go? Because it will take time to change, and you'll want to do it effectively and efficiently and authentically. And so, how do you do that?
Yeah, and I think it's a few ways to set yourself up for success is connecting with the leaders, right? And using it if you're not asking directly for feedback on yourself, but using it more of what would it take to move up in this organization? That was one. I think it's also preparing ahead of time for the meeting agenda, right? See what you can do to come up with some things. Just do a little homework, get your mind already in that processing state, having some questions to like you could ask. And then you also mentioned being in the meeting, being mentally present, emotionally present, so you can listen. You're not worried about what anyone else is doing. You're truly being an observer. So you could ask maybe some thoughtful questions or bring up some clarifications and not getting into that kind of, emotional center in your brain, the amygdala section of your
Yeah.
brain.
And if you do go there, if you feel a tendency to go in that direction, how are you going to reconnect to your thinking brain and bring yourself back to base so that you can continue to stay in the meeting? Because you and I both know meetings aren't 30 to 60 minutes is like a nice meeting. But a lot of times at the upper levels of leadership, we have longer meetings. We have, deeper level discussions about strategy and, making decisions about things that are going to be impactful to the company. So how do you keep yourself grounded if you do find yourself going into that emotional space?
Yeah. Anything we missed? Is that about summarize what we talked about?
Yeah, I think so. Just, staying curious about the whole thing, staying curious about what you're thinking, what you think you need, um, what is going on in the moment. And then what do you want bigger picture, longer term?
Mhm.
How will this help you if you can find the path, right, of whatever it is in that
Yeah.
culture that's going to get you there? But I love that word, just curiosity or staying curious. Because I think we go into situations thinking we know, and that's what puts us on a certain track. And so
Mhm.
stay curious longer, I know, is one of our tenets of coaching.
Yeah. Well, Julie, thanks for your time. Hopefully, this is helping not only the person who this was a legit question for from, but others who are also facing some of the same things. Like I said, I talked to a leader this morning, same situation. So
Mm.
hopefully it resonates and it's helpful. But thank you
Well,
for your time. I
absolutely.
appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks so much for it's a great chat. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Until next month, we'll sign off.
All right.